Welcome to the Real News Network in Baltimore. I'm Kim Brown. Let's talk about sex tourism, the practice of vacationing to a state or a country for the purpose of taking advantage of the lack of restrictions imposed on prostitution and other sexual activities by some foreign nations. Now, sex tourism happens right here in America. Hawaii, for example, has recently passed a law criminalizing travel agents who arrange sex vacations for tourists. But sex tourism is very pronounced in Asia, the Caribbean, and Latin America, especially with Westerners who travel there to commit pedophilia and have sex with those who are underage. Oftentimes, for those groups, there are little to no protections and certainly no penalties for the foreigners who partake in that behavior. Until now. A landmark settlement was handed down by a federal jury in Minneapolis, Minnesota earlier this month, awarding a woman named Pt.1 Fang from Laos nearly $1 million after she was raped by an American in her home country. This is the first judgment ever in a civil case involving sex tourism. And today we are joined with the attorneys representing Ms. Fang in this unprecedented outcome. We're joined today with Linda Miller. She is an attorney. She is also the founder and executive director of Civil Society, which is a Minnesota-based nonprofit that provides legal and case management services to victims of human trafficking, sexual assault, and abuse. She has 30 years' experience dealing with the underserved and frequently victimized populations, and she speaks internationally on the topic of international human trafficking victim service provision. We're also joined with Patrick Arenz. He is a trial lawyer at Robbins Kaplan, which is a national trial firm with more than 220 attorneys in 8 offices nationwide, and he serves as the chair of the firm's pro bono committee. He litigates and tries high-stakes cases involving patent infringement and intellectual property license disputes, and he has dedicated his time to pro bono work to support individuals who cannot otherwise afford representation. They're joining us today from Minneapolis. Thank you both for joining us on The Real News.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim.
So we're going to start with Linda, because Linda, as I understand, you have been dealing with Ms. Fang's case since 2012. So how did this case even, wait, let's back up for a moment. Let's go over the details of this case, because Ms. Pt.1 Fang, was a 14-year-old girl living in Laos when she was contacted or made contact with this American whose name was Tiawatchu Prataya, who traveled to Laos and sexually assaulted her. Linda, can you tell us what happened?
Well, yes, that is exactly right. He contacted her and called her repeatedly and promised her lots of money and said he was very wealthy and that he was going to bring her beautiful clothing, necklace, and shoes. And she was a child from a small village, 12 hours away from the capital city in Laos. And very poor, like getting one outfit a year. So this was tantalizing to her. He arranged for someone to take her to the capital city and supposedly for recording on a song on CDs, and then instead of giving her those things, he did give her those things eventually, but he raped her.
So did Ms. Fang know that this is what Mr. Prataya's intentions were, to come to Laos in exchange for a sexual encounter?
Her testimony, and I believe her 100%, is that she had no idea that, and it was never discussed.
So how did this case first come to your attention? Both Patrick and Linda, feel free to answer.
Well, I worked with a Hmong women's group who brought me many Hmong clients, and Pt.1 Fang was one of them. She was in the United States at that time because the rape occurred in Laos. she became pregnant and gave birth in Laos, and then later her father brought her mother, her sister, and her to the United States on an asylee unification visa. And so that's why she was in the United States. So she was trying to get, she was hysterical actually when they brought her. She was trying to get legal representation to protect her from this man.
And then the federal case started around in 2012. There was kind of a long pretrial period with it. Ultimately, as a trial date was set, Linda contacted Robbins Kaplan and contacted me, largely because it's in our firm's DNA to ensure access to justice, even for those who can't afford it. And as you mentioned at the outset, I am chair of our firm's pro bono committee, and this case had all the hallmarks of attributes we look to in terms of deciding which cases to accept, especially because it hadn't been done before. It was for a very deserving client, and it was a case that I knew I couldn't say no to.
Linda's already answered the question, Patrick. I'm curious, what was it about Ms. Fang's story that you found credible?
Well, I just chuckle a little bit because every trial, the judge instructs the jury almost right out the gate that anything the lawyer says is not evidence. And so I'm not used to having people kind of turn to me to ask, what was credible or not. But I think what the best way to answer that question really is to kind of look at it through the prism of the evidence that was presented to the jury. And there were two main questions on liability that the jury was asked to answer. Was Pania Vang under 16 at the time of the assault? And was the sexual intercourse consensual or was it forced? And on the issue of the age, we were able to offer evidence of kind of an unbroken chain of documents, official documents from Laos, from the United States, ranging from passports to visas to driver's license to green cards, that all corroborated and confirmed that she would have been 14 at the time of the assault. So we had a robust set of documentary evidence to prove her age. And as far as whether on the issue of consent or force, that was largely an issue of competing testimony. And I think when you look at the record at trial, Pania Vang took the stand for over 5 hours, and she testified in painstaking detail as to what happened and was able to describe in detail how it happened. In contrast, the defendant, Mr. Pertaya, testified on direct examination for about 12 minutes and was very general in his denials, but didn't offer any details. And he was very stoic in his emotion. In contrast, Pania Vang, she testified in Hmong, so it was translated. But if you were in that courtroom, even if you couldn't understand Hmong, you could tell the emotion she was speaking with was an emotion that could not be manufactured or could not be made up. It was very powerful.
That's totally true. The other interesting thing about the trial, I think, is we had a lot of photos from Laos showing the poverty of her village and her home, and showing these pictures actually were used also to prove her age, because she was standing there with her little sister, whose birth date was not contested ever. And the little sister was obviously 1, and she was obviously 2.
We are speaking with Patrick Arenz and Linda Miller. They are attorneys representing Pania Vang, who is a Laotian woman who was awarded nearly $1 million by a federal jury in connection to a rape she experienced at the hand of an American in her home country. This settlement is the first of its kind where a victim of sex tourism has been able to recoup damages in a civil American court. Stay with us. We'll be right back for part 2 of our conversation right here on The Real News.